you're studying, and the question of whether it's right or not is more or less settled. But you never have the feeling you understood it. You always have the feeling that in each generation, it's just as puzzling to understand the next facet of this theory as it was in the last generation. That's kind of my vision of the future, because I can't believe that nature is going to let us reach the stage where we will say that our ancestors didn't understand the laws of nature, but we are wise and we understand them. And that process ended in the year X. I just can't, I find it very hard to imagine things ending like that. So when people try to imagine them not ending like that, the standard way of thinking about it, I think, has been that maybe you peel off more and more layers of the onion and you keep finding new theories.
Yeah.
But I feel that there's an alternative, which we might be coming to, where in some sense, which is still mysterious, I can't imagine exactly how it would work, I'm only vaguely groping toward it, but in some sense, you'd learn what the theory was, but it would be such a tricky and clever theory that it would be clear that it would always be clear that in some very basic sense, the process of understanding it was still going on, as it is for the number theorists. And I think there will be some why questions that will still be with us. I think we'll be dazzled, as we in fact already are, that this theory exists. But in a way, why it exists is a bit mysterious, and why we live in a natural world that's governed by it will be mysterious. I think, for instance, we'll understand better the Big Bang. We'll understand better black holes. We'll have a better understanding of elementary particles, electrons, protons, neutrons, and so on. Why they have the masses they do, why they behave the way they do, why they have what we call the interactions, the electric charges, and so on. So those are the Big Bang, the black holes, and the particles are what we will understand better.
But our consciousness,
yeah, I think I tend to believe
why
that
we are here.
Well, why we're here at a meta level, I think, will remain a mystery. But why life is possible, in a sense, will be clearer. It already is, because many aspects of why life is possible became much clearer with 19th and 20th century physics and chemistry. But, and many other aspects of that, I think, will fall into place. Consciousness, I tend to believe that consciousness will be a mystery.
Remain a mystery.
Yes, that's what I tend to believe.
Forever?
That's what I tend to believe. I tend to think that the workings of the conscious brain will be elucidated to a large extent. So I tend to believe that biologists and perhaps physicists contributing will understand much better how the brain works. But why something that we call consciousness goes with those workings, I think will remain mysterious. Perhaps I'm mistaken. I have a much easier time imagining how we'd understand the Big Bang, even though we can't do it yet, than I can imagine understanding consciousness.
Understanding superstring is easy compared to understanding how your brains are working, developing theory of superstring.
When you say understanding how the brain is working, I think understanding the functioning of the brain is a very exciting problem on which there probably will be a lot of progress in the next few decades. That's not out of reach. But I think there's probably a level of mystery that will remain about why the brain, whose functionings we can see, creates consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. How it functions in the way that a conscious being functions will become clearer. But what it is we're experiencing when we experience consciousness, I see as remaining a mystery.
Or you want it to remain a mystery?
Well, I don't think my wants and diswants have much to do with it. I can't conceive of it not remaining a mystery unless there's some modification of the laws of physics that's relevant to understanding the functioning of the brain. And I think that's very unlikely.
Would you define consciousness as sheer beauty, the working of it?
No, I'm not going to attempt to define consciousness in a way that's connected with the fact that I don't believe it will become part of physics. I think I won't try to say anything about it. I'll leave it as an undefined term like the undefined terms at the beginning of a math book.
Yeah. Yeah, want to talk about it? No, not about consciousness. Huh?
Well, like I say, I'm skeptical that it's going to become part of physics.
Yeah.
Yet, of course, whatever you think about consciousness, it's an important part of us and of how we perceive anything, including physics. And that has to do, I think, with the mysteries that bother a lot of people about quantum mechanics and its applications to the universe. So, quantum mechanics kind of has an all-embracing property that, to completely make sense, it has to be applied to everything in sight, including ultimately the observer. But trying to apply quantum mechanics to ourselves makes us extremely uncomfortable, especially because of our consciousness, which seems to clash with that idea. So we're left with a disquiet concerning quantum mechanics and its applications to the universe. And I do not believe that that disquiet will go away. If anything, I suspect that it will acquire new dimensions, new aspects. Again, this is a point in which I don't agree with all physicists by any means. Roger Penrose is one of the most distinguished physicists who believes that there will eventually be some modification or reinterpretation of quantum mechanics. I think he's a modification, which will have something new to say about consciousness, and in the context of which some of our disquiet would go away. I can't speak for him precisely. But I think that, I don't think that'll happen personally. I think that our discomfort with quantum mechanics, with the strange notions in some senses called probabilistic, have to do with the fact that there's a big gap between what really are the laws of nature and what the aspects of the laws that we experience in everyday life on a large scale. We just don't have quantum mechanics wired into our brains. Our ancestors for millions of years grew up under conditions where Newton's laws were important.
Yeah.
So Newton's laws, although we weren't born with an intuitive knowledge of them, many aspects of how they work actually are wired into us. We don't have any trouble. If a body is tossed into the air, following it, and it's not, I don't think it's only a learned trait. Somehow, the behavior of the body following a parabola, or the ability of the eye to follow it, had great survival value. And in evolution, aspects of Newton's laws were wired into our systems. But aspects of nature where quantum mechanics is important weren't important for our descendants. Our ancestors.
Yeah.
So evolution didn't prepare us for understanding Schrödinger's equation. And so we're left with a feeling of disquiet about it, which I think won't go away.
Yeah, we're talking about beauty. The connection between...
I sometimes think it should be beauty, consolation, and awe, because there's a feeling of awe about the way the universe works. And the disquiet about quantum mechanics is the other side of a feeling of awe that such a bizarre thing, which is probably stranger than 1,000 philosophers could think of in 1,000 years, to paraphrase my friend Sidney Coleman. There's a feeling of awe that such a strange structure really does describe the universe. It's beautiful, but it's also awe-inspiring. Sorry, though, to interrupt.
No. What did you mean? What do you really mean by awe?
Well,
The connotation of beauty we're talking about.
Yeah, there's really a feeling of wonder about the strangeness of the laws. Because the laws of nature, to the extent that physicists have been able to unearth them, are extremely beautiful and harmonious, but they're also strange. And they're puzzling because of certain aspects, like the quantum mechanical uncertainty. They're very puzzling. Even puzzle philosophers, when you try to think about yourself as a conscious being living in a quantum mechanical universe. It's a very strange feeling. And like I've said a few times in different ways, it's a strangeness I don't feel will go away. And because the strangeness won't go away, I think that the feeling of surprise and awe associated with it will always be fresh. I think it will always be surprising for people who learn about it. And even if our remote descendants evolve into the strange forms that, according to Dyson, are needed to live in the far future,
Mm-hmm.
I think also to those creatures, quantum mechanics will seem strange. In time, we'll probably be pretty close to understanding a final theory of the laws of nature, but will it be left with basic mysteries? One basic mystery to me is why such a rich and amazing theory exists. Of course, it's a question that can't have an answer. It's a little bit like asking why Fermat's last theorem is true. Well, it was proved, but ultimately, it's an inevitable consequence of numbers that that theorem is true. And somehow, the numbers are there. There isn't anything we can do about it. We can feel puzzled if we try to think about why that structure that number theorists study is there. But that's the way it is. And I think it's very surprising that something like string theory exists. I think we're always going to be puzzled over that, or even if string theory would prove to be wrong. Our richest theories have that characteristic of puzzlement about why they exist. And there's a second level of puzzlement about why they prove to have such delicate properties. We haven't discussed this very much yet, but the laws of nature are very delicate. And then once you've got the laws, when you try to solve them, you find that they often have very rich properties. And if you try to tamper with them a little bit, the properties of the solutions many times would be much less rich. So for instance, just with physics we already know that galaxies, stars, and planets roughly like ours could have formed, and that living things roughly like us could have formed, depends on many details of the laws of nature as we currently know them, being just the way they are, and not being slightly different. What I personally think is going to happen is that we're never going to resolve the sense of wonder about that. Some people hope to do so with what they call an anthropic principle. But the way I see things developing is that in time we get a better understanding of why the laws of nature are just the way they are. And the laws of nature being the way they are, in the end they have the rich properties they do, and it's all just so delicately balanced that the structures we're familiar with, the stars, the planets, and the galaxies, and eventually us, exist. And trying to ask why that's true is going to be always a little bit like trying to ask why the circumference of a circle is between 3.14 and 3.15 times the diameter. You can demonstrate it if you get far enough with your maths and you understand enough the principles of geometry. But it's not a question you're really going to get a why answer to. So you get an explanation, but I think you're left with a sense of wonder. It's amazing that you do the calculation and you find that the hydrogen to helium abundance came out just right and all kinds of other things came out just right. So when you do that calculation, you need to know all kinds of things, such as the circumference of a circle, the numerical value of the number pi introduced by the Greeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't completely joking when I said that it's like asking why pi is between 3.14 and 3.15. Because I have no doubt that if you made a 0.3% error in pi, you would discover that life was impossible.
And in the end, will we find an interested God?
Well, I don't think... I think I'm going to leave it to your viewers to supply their own answers.
Yeah, Weinberg said, remembrance of the Holocaust leaves me unsympathetic to attempts to justify the ways of God to man. Do you agree?
Well, I'm not going to personally embark on any such attempts, so I'm sympathetic to Weinberg's remarks. However, as I've said, I think I'll prefer to leave it to your readers to interpret the sense of wonder about the cosmos in different ways. I think that physics contributes to that sense of wonder, clarifies what aspects are most wondrous and how they're correlated with each other, and shows us more amazing structures behind it all. But there is a certain level of individual response to that sense of wonder where I don't want to make any recommendations to your viewers.
What are yours? What is your view?
My view is that that it's wonderful that Fermat's last theorem is true and that pi is between 3.14 and 3.15. And that the concrete questions end up with standard scientific answers, enriching our sense of wonder.
The more you know, the more you understand,
Well, I think
the more...
you can appreciate the wonder of the cosmos more when you understand it better. So in that sense, I think that the feeling of wonder you experience when you look out at the night sky from a dark spot on a starry night, which unfortunately most of us get less and less often in the industrial age with so many lights, and the fact that in many cities you can't see very many stars. But anyway, I think this sense of wonder is enriched a lot by knowing more what the stars are, and that fuzzy object, the Andromeda Galaxy, that you can just barely see, as a fuzzy patch if you're in a very dark spot, knowing more about what it is. And then at a deeper level, knowing about the Big Bang and the production of hydrogen and helium from the Big Bang, how the stars are made and how they work and all that. You understand a lot more behind it. You understand a lot more about what's behind it. And, well, it is an amazing universe we live in.
I have a strange question. The Holocaust, Weinberg was mentioning it, about this noble, caring God, beginning of the universe. Did it play any role in your childhood or in your later life? The remembrance of? I'm leaving now the serenity
yes.
of the universe for a while.
Yes. Well, the knowledge that such a thing happened, and of course in my case, many dozens of my mother's relatives who lived in Poland were victims, was something I was very much aware of growing up. But it's hard to say something concrete about it that wouldn't sound like a cliche. So much has been said. Well, when you ask me about physics, I feel I may know one or two things that might be novel for your audience. But to be perfectly honest, well, the Holocaust, of course, is a difficult and painful subject, and it's not one in which I can offer any insight about, how such a thing could happen.
Your parents, did they talk about it?
They did not talk about it very often, no. From my mother's family who lived in Poland, there actually was one survivor who was there at the time. He was hidden, well, he had many adventures, but roughly speaking, he was hidden in a hole in a farmer's barn for a couple of years. And eventually, when the Russians came close, escaped behind Russian lines. And he really didn't talk about it very often. In fact, he eventually, when he was very late in his life, made a videotape at the request of some of my cousins about his experiences. But I never personally heard more than bits and snatches, although I've watched the videotape. And when my daughters asked him about it, he once said that it was too painful to talk about, which I guess isn't surprising.